I witnessed my daughter-in-law Diane tossing my granddaughter Abby's cherished baby blanket into the trash. Shocked at this callous act towards something so precious, I retrieved it after she left. This blanket held special memories, handcrafted with love for Abby's birth. At home, I noticed something unusual about its weight. When I spread it across my bed, my fingers detected something hard sewn inside. Curious and concerned, I carefully cut open a seam. What I discovered inside made my blood run cold. The relationship between my son Thomas and I has always been close. After losing my husband Frank to cancer 2 years ago, Thomas and his adorable 4-year-old daughter Abby became my world. Every Sunday, they would visit for dinner, and those evenings filled my otherwise quiet house with laughter and love. Thomas met Diane at the law firm where he worked as an attorney. She was a paralegal with striking looks and a charming personality that seemed to light up any room she entered. When Thomas first introduced us, I welcomed her warmly. She appeared devoted to both Thomas and little Abby, who was only 2 at the time. I remember thinking how fortunate my son was to find someone who embraced not only him, but also his role as a single father. Over the past year, though, subtle changes began to surface. Diane's warm smiles became less frequent, particularly when Thomas wasn't looking. I noticed how she controlled their social calendar, gradually limiting their visits to my home. Thomas explained they were just busy, but I sensed something more restrictive at play. Still, I kept my concerns to myself, not wanting to cause any tension in their relationship. The blanket that Diane so carelessly discarded wasn't just any baby blanket. After Frank passed away, I channeled my grief into creating something special for Abby. I carefully selected patches from Frank's favorite shirts, ones that still carried the faint scent of his cologne, and spent weeks stitching them together. The blue plaid from his fishing trips, the soft flannel he wore every Christmas morning, the pinstriped cotton from our anniversary dinners, each piece told a story of the grandfather Abby would never know. When I presented it to her on her 2nd birthday, she hugged it close, somehow sensing its significance, despite her young age. Now, as I sat on my bed, with the partially opened blanket, my hands trembled. Inside the small opening I'd made was the corner of what appeared to be a plastic bag containing several flash drives and a small notebook with coded entries. My first thought was confusion. Why would Diane hide these items in Abby's cherished blanket? And more troubling, why throw away something so precious to my granddaughter? With shaking hands, I connected one of the flash drives to my computer. What appeared on my screen sent waves of nausea through my body. There were dozens of photos of Diane with another man, clearly romantic in nature. In some, they were embracing in unfamiliar locations. In others, they were intimately entwined. The dates on the files showed they were taken over the past 18 months, well into her marriage with Thomas. But the betrayal went beyond infidelity. As I continued searching through the files, I discovered financial documents showing large transfers from Thomas's personal and business accounts to offshore locations I didn't recognize. Meticulous records of passwords, account numbers, and transaction histories filled spreadsheets, all in Diane's handwriting. Just when I thought the situation couldn't be more devastating, I opened a folder labeled simply A and found scanned copies of adoption paperwork. My heart nearly stopped when I saw Abby's full name on the documents, but instead of Thomas being listed as her father, there was the name of the man from the photos, Patrick Walters. The room seemed to spin around me. Could my precious granddaughter, the spitting image of Thomas, with her dark, curly hair and deep brown eyes, not be his biological child? Had Diane been orchestrating an elaborate deception from the very beginning? The weight of these questions crushed against my chest as tears blurred my vision. How could I possibly tell my son that the family he cherished might be built on lies? That the woman he married may have been plotting against him all along? That his beloved daughter might not be his by blood? The questions swirled in my mind as I carefully replaced everything exactly as I had found it, sewing the seam closed with trembling hands. One thing was certain. Nothing about this situation was as it seemed, and my family was in danger. Sleep eluded me that night. By morning, I had made a decision. I wouldn't confront Thomas immediately. Without concrete proof beyond the digital files, this could easily become my word against Diane's. Thomas adored her, and raising these accusations without irrefutable evidence might permanently damage our relationship if he didn't believe me. I needed to investigate further. Over the next week, I made excuses to visit their home more frequently, bringing homemade meals and offering to babysit Abby. During these visits, I observed Diane carefully, noting how she stepped outside for phone calls or abruptly left the room when her cell phone chimed with certain notifications. Once, while she was in the shower, I glimpsed her phone lighting up with a message from P that read only, "Everything still on schedule." Diane's behavior toward Abby also troubled me. While she maintained a perfect maternal image when Thomas was present, her demeanor shifted noticeably when they were alone. She wasn't outright cruel, but there was a detachment, a coldness that no 4-year-old deserved from a parent. Abby had become increasingly clingy with her blanket during my visits, clutching it tightly whenever Diane entered the room. I needed more information about Diane's past. Fortunately, I still had connections at Thomas's law firm through my old friend, Susan Porter. We had known each other for 30 years, having met when our husbands worked together at the same company. Susan now worked as an administrative assistant in the human resources department of the law firm. I invited her to lunch, framing my questions carefully. "I'm planning a surprise anniversary gift for Thomas and Diane," I explained over salads at our favorite cafe. "I want to create a memory book that includes some details from before they met. Do you remember anything about Diane's background from when she was hired?" Susan's expression shifted subtly. "That's thoughtful of you, Claire. Diane wasn't very forthcoming about her past, even during the hiring process." She lowered her voice. "Actually, there was something odd that I probably shouldn't mention." I leaned forward, my heart racing. "We've been friends for 3 decades, Susan. You can trust me with anything." After a moment's hesitation, she continued. "When I was organizing the personnel files last year, I noticed something unusual about Diane's employment history. She listed 3 other law firms before joining ours, but when we called for references, 2 of them had no record of her employment." My breath caught. "Did anyone follow up on that discrepancy?" Susan nodded. "The hiring manager did at the time. She provided corrected information, claiming she had mixed up the dates. Everything checked out with her corrected references, so they moved forward with the hire. She was extraordinarily qualified, after all." This revelation sent my mind spinning. After lunch, I drove straight to the public library and used their computers to search for information about Diane's previous employers. What I discovered was shocking. While she had indeed worked at those firms, each employment had ended abruptly. Through social media connections and a few careful phone calls posing as a reference checker, I learned that Diane had been fired from her position at Lambert & Associates for unauthorized access to client accounts. The pieces were beginning to form a disturbing picture, but I still needed to understand the connection between Diane and this Patrick person. The following Tuesday, when Diane mentioned she had errands to run while Thomas was working late, I offered to watch Abby. As soon as she left, I followed her at a discreet distance. 20 minutes later, Diane pulled into the parking lot of a roadside diner 30 miles outside of town. I parked my car where I could observe, without being spotted, and watched as she entered the establishment. Through the large windows, I could see her greeting a man with a familiar face, the same man from the photos on the flash drive. I waited 10 minutes before entering, wearing a scarf around my hair and sunglasses, despite the cloudy day. I took a booth near enough to overhear fragments of their conversation while hiding behind a menu. "The transfers are nearly complete," I heard Diane say, in a low voice. "Another 2 weeks at most." "And he doesn't suspect anything?" Patrick asked. "Not a thing. He trusts me completely with the accounts now." "What about the girl? Is everything arranged?" At the mention of Abby, Diane's voice dropped even lower. I could only catch phrases. Paperwork ready, perfect timing, and most chillingly, He'll never find us. I left before they could notice me, my hands shaking so badly I could hardly grip my car keys. There was no longer any doubt. They were planning something that involved both money and Abby. But what exactly? And how soon would they act? Back home, I copied all the files from the flash drives onto my personal computer, then carefully repaired the seam in the blanket and returned the original evidence. Watching Diane interact with my family became increasingly painful. She masterfully played the role of devoted wife and mother when Thomas was watching, but the moment his attention turned elsewhere, her facade slipped. The cold glances she gave Abby when the child sought her attention, the impatient sighs when Abby asked for help, these subtle rejections were breaking my heart. I began spending even more time with Abby, often taking her to the park or for ice cream after preschool. During these outings, I gently tried to learn more about her relationship with Diane. "Do you and Mommy have fun together when Daddy's at work?" I asked one afternoon as we fed ducks at the pond. Abby's little shoulders tensed. "Sometimes. Mostly I play in my room while Mommy talks on the phone." "Does she talk on the phone a lot?" Abby nodded solemnly. "She talks to her special friend." "I'm not supposed to listen." My pulse quickened. "Her special friend? Do you know who that is?" "A man. He visited once when Daddy was on his business trip. Mommy said it was her brother, but—" She hesitated, suddenly looking frightened. "It's okay, sweetheart. You can tell Grandma anything." "She doesn't talk to him like she talks to Uncle Jim," she whispered, referring to Thomas's actual brother. "And they went on a secret trip. I had to stay with the babysitter, but I wasn't supposed to tell Daddy." This confirmation of my suspicions sent ice through my veins. "Abby, honey, you're not in any trouble. You can always tell me anything, okay?" She nodded, but the worry in her young eyes troubled me deeply. The next day, I arranged to speak with Mrs. Peterson, Abby's preschool teacher, under the pretense of planning a surprise birthday party. After discussing party favors for a few minutes, I steered the conversation toward Abby's general well-being. "I've noticed Abby seems a bit withdrawn lately. Has she been the same at school?" Mrs. Peterson's professional smile faltered. "I'm glad you brought this up, Mrs. Reynolds. We've noticed some concerning changes in Abby's behavior over the past few months. She's become more isolated from the other children, and she's developed some anxiety around pickup time, especially when her mother comes instead of her father." "Has she said anything that might explain this anxiety?" "Not directly. But she's become extremely attached to that patchwork blanket she brings. She becomes quite distressed if anyone touches it, or if she has to put it away for activities." Mrs. Peterson hesitated before adding, "This level of attachment can sometimes indicate a child's need for security when other aspects of their life feel unpredictable." That evening, Abby stayed overnight at my house, while Thomas and Diane attended a work function. As I was giving her a bath before bedtime, I noticed unusual bruising on her back and arms. "Sweetheart, what happened here?" I asked, gently touching a purple mark on her shoulder. Abby's eyes immediately filled with tears. "I fell." The response came too quickly, too rehearsed. "Are you sure that's what happened?" She bit her lip, looking down at the bubbles. "Mommy said I'm clumsy. I bump into things." Something in her voice broke my heart. "Abby, did someone hurt you?" After a long pause, she whispered so quietly, I almost missed it. "Don't tell Mommy we talked about Blanky, or the treasure inside. She'll be mad." My blood froze. "You know about what's inside your blanket?" She nodded slightly. "I saw Mommy putting things in it. She said it's our secret, and if I tell Daddy, something bad will happen to him." I struggled to maintain my composure as I finished her bath and tucked her into bed with her precious blanket. Once she was asleep, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea that grew cold as I contemplated my next steps. Just as I'd decided to speak with Thomas the following day, my phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging or everyone gets hurt. This isn't your business, old woman." The threat confirmed what I already knew. I was getting closer to the truth, and Diane was aware of my suspicions. But how? Had she noticed the blanket had been tampered with? Had she seen me at the diner? Whatever the case, the message made one thing crystal clear. Time was running out for my family. I barely slept that night, keeping my bedroom door open to hear if anyone tried to enter the house. By morning, I had decided I needed to speak with Thomas immediately, regardless of the consequences. I called him at work and asked if we could meet for lunch. He sounded harried, but agreed to see me at a cafe near his office. Thomas looked exhausted when he arrived, with dark circles under his eyes and his normally impeccable suit slightly rumpled. "Dad's been gone 2 years today," he said after ordering coffee. "Is that why you wanted to meet? You should have said something. I could have brought flowers to the cemetery." I had completely forgotten the significance of the date, which made what I needed to say even harder. "No, Thomas, though I appreciate you remembering, I need to talk to you about something important." "About Diane." His expression immediately turned guarded. "Mom, I know you two haven't always connected, but she's really trying. She's just under a lot of stress right now." "This isn't about our relationship," I said carefully. "I'm concerned about some things I've noticed recently. Has Diane been making financial decisions without consulting you? Or taking money from your accounts?" Thomas stared at me, his expression hardening. "What are you implying?" "Diane helps manage our finances because I'm too busy with casework. She's actually been incredible, helping us recover from some investment losses I made last year." This was news to me. "What investment losses?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I made some poor decisions with our retirement funds. Lost nearly $200,000. Diane has connections in finance who've been helping us recoup some of it." "Why are you asking about this?" I wanted to tell him everything. The flash drives, the photos, the offshore accounts. But his defensive posture made me hesitate. Without hard evidence, beyond digital files that could have been tampered with, would he believe me over his wife? "I'm just worried about you and Abby," I said finally. "Has Abby mentioned anything unusual lately? About Diane's behavior, or anyone visiting when you're not home?" Thomas's expression shifted from defensive to concerned. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mom?" "I think Diane might not be who she claims to be," I said quietly. "I think she might be planning something that could hurt you and Abby." He stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his coffee. "This is ridiculous. Diane has done nothing but support me and love Abby. I know you've been lonely since Dad died, but inventing conspiracies about my wife isn't the answer. Thomas, please, just listen." "No, Mom. This conversation is over." He threw some bills on the table and walked out, leaving me sitting alone with my cold coffee and growing dread. I realized I had mishandled the situation badly. Without concrete evidence, I had only succeeded in alienating Thomas and potentially alerting Diane that I was onto her scheme. I needed to confront her directly, away from Thomas and Abby. The opportunity came the next day when Thomas called to say he'd be working late again. I drove to their house, rehearsing what I would say. When Diane opened the door, her smile disappeared the moment she saw me. "Claire, Thomas isn't home." "I know. I came to speak with you," I said, walking past her into the foyer. "Where's Abby?" "Playing upstairs. What's this about?" Her tone was icy. I turned to face her, summoning all my courage. "I know what you're planning, Diane. I know about Patrick, the offshore accounts, and the adoption paperwork." For a moment, genuine shock registered on her face before she regained her composure. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I found the flash drives you hid in Abby's blanket. I've seen the photos of you two together, the financial records, everything." Her eyes narrowed. "You had no right to go through my personal property. It was in my granddaughter's blanket, which you threw in the trash. Why would you do that, unless you were planning to leave soon and didn't want evidence linking you to Thomas or this house?" A cold smile spread across her face. "You really think anyone would believe the ramblings of a pathetic old woman? Thomas only visits you out of obligation. He thinks you're becoming senile." Her words stung, but I stood my ground. "He'll believe me when I show him proof, and the police will be very interested in those financial transfers." "You have no proof," she hissed. And if you try to interfere with my family, I'll make sure you never see Abby again." "She's not your family," I shot back. "Is she even Patrick's? Or was that paperwork just another part of your scheme?" Something dangerous flashed in Diane's eyes, but before she could respond, the front door opened. A tall man with sandy hair entered without knocking, stopping short when he saw me. "Who's this?" he asked Diane. She recovered quickly. "Patrick, this is Claire, Thomas's mother. She was just leaving." Turning to me, she added, "My brother came by to help with some household repairs." I stared at the man I recognized from the photos. "Your brother? Interesting. Most sisters don't take romantic vacations with their brothers, or kiss them the way you were kissing him in those photos I found." Patrick's expression darkened. "What photos? What is she talking about, Liz?" "Liz?" The slip confirmed my suspicions. Diane wasn't even her real name. "Nothing," Diane said quickly. "She's confused. Apparently, she's been going through our things." Patrick stepped closer to me, his presence intimidating. "That's concerning. Maybe we should call Thomas, let him know his mother is having these episodes." "Excellent idea," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "While we're at it, we can ask him about that $300,000 withdrawal from his business account last week, the one you seem to know about despite never being introduced to my son." Patrick's momentary confusion told me everything. He hadn't expected me to know that detail. "That's enough," Diane snapped. "Claire, you need to leave. Now, before I call the police and report you for harassment and breaking and entering." "Breaking and entering?" The door was open, and Thomas has always told me I'm welcome any time. I turned to Patrick. "Does Diane know you're still legally married? Or is bigamy just another crime to add to your list?" The color drained from Diane's face. "Get out!" she shouted, grabbing my arm and pushing me toward the door. "You stay away from us, you hear me? Stay away from Abby!" "Grandma?" A small voice called from the top of the stairs. Abby stood in her pajamas, clutching her blanket. "Are you leaving?" "Yes, sweetie, but I'll see you soon," I called, trying to keep my voice steady, despite Diane's painful grip on my arm. "No, you won't," Diane whispered, as she shoved me onto the porch and slammed the door. I immediately tried calling Thomas, but got no answer. Standing in the darkening evening, watching shadows move behind the curtains of what had been my son's happy home, I had never felt more helpless or more determined to protect my family from the predators who had infiltrated it. The next morning, I drove straight to Thomas's office, desperate to speak with him after multiple unanswered calls. His secretary looked uncomfortable when I asked to see him. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Reynolds, but Mr. Reynolds left about an hour ago. He received a call and said it was a family emergency." My heart raced. "Did he say what kind of emergency?" "No, ma'am, but he seemed quite distressed." I thanked her and rushed to my car, calling Thomas's cell phone repeatedly as I drove to his house. Each call went straight to voicemail. When I pulled into his driveway, I noticed the garage door was partially open, though neither Thomas's nor Diane's cars were visible from the street. The front door was locked, but I still had the spare key Thomas had given me years ago. The house was eerily quiet when I entered, with drawers left open and items strewn about as if someone had packed in a hurry. I called out for Thomas and Abby, but no one answered. A mounting sense of dread propelled me through the house. In Abby's room, half her clothes were gone, along with her favorite stuffed animals. In the master bedroom, Diane's closet stood empty, hangers scattered across the floor. I was heading back downstairs when I heard a faint sound coming from the garage. I rushed through the kitchen and flung open the door to find Thomas slumped beside his car, semi-conscious. "Thomas." I fell to my knees beside him, checking for injuries. "What happened? Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Mom? What are you?" His speech was slurred, and he struggled to sit up. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, reporting that my son appeared to have been drugged or poisoned. While waiting for the ambulance, I helped Thomas to a sitting position and gave him water. "Where's Abby?" I asked urgently. Diane said. "Taking her to the doctor," he mumbled. "Wasn't feeling well. I was going to meet them but got so dizzy. His head lolled forward. As the paramedics loaded Thomas into the ambulance, I noticed a piece of paper that had fallen from his pocket. It was a handwritten note that read, "Meet us at the lake house by 4. Bring the final paperwork. Abby misses her daddy." I showed the note to one of the police officers who had arrived with the ambulance. "My daughter-in-law has taken my granddaughter. I believe they're planning to flee with embezzled money." The officer looked skeptical. "Ma'am, this sounds like a family matter. Do you have any evidence of criminal activity?" I explained about the financial documents I'd discovered and Diane's true identity as Liz or Elizabeth. I mentioned the threatening text message and Thomas's condition. The officer took notes, but remained non-committal. "We'll look into it, but without clear evidence of a crime, there's not much we can do immediately." Family disputes. "This isn't a dispute," I interrupted. "My granddaughter has been taken by a woman who has been systematically stealing from my son and who may have just poisoned him." "We'll need to wait for the toxicology report," he replied calmly. "In the meantime, I suggest you go to the hospital and wait for your son to recover enough to make a statement." Frustrated, but knowing I needed more concrete evidence, I agreed to follow the ambulance. Before leaving, I quickly searched the basement, where Thomas kept old files and mementos. In a dusty corner, I found a box labeled Diane. Documents that contained her job application and background check from when they first met. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Hidden beneath old tax forms were newspaper clippings and printouts that Thomas had apparently collected but never confronted Diane about. One headline read, "Elizabeth Winters wanted for questioning in husband's disappearance." The accompanying photo showed a younger version of Diane with differently styled hair, but unmistakably the same person. Another article detailed fraud charges against Elizabeth Winters and Patrick Walters in 2 different states. My son had discovered the truth, or at least suspected it, but had either been in denial or planning his own confrontation. The dates on the printouts were from 3 months ago, around the same time Thomas had mentioned making investment losses. I now wondered if those losses were actually Diane's first major theft that Thomas had discovered and then covered up, perhaps to protect Abby or to gather more evidence. I gathered everything and rushed to the hospital, where Thomas was being treated for what the doctors suspected was a benzodiazepine overdose. While waiting for him to regain full consciousness, I called the police officer again, this time with specific information about Elizabeth Winters and Patrick Walters. "They've done this before," I explained, reading from the articles. "They target wealthy single parents, gain access to their accounts, then disappear with the children and money. There are warrants for their arrest in Florida and Georgia." With this new information, the officer's demeanor changed completely. "We'll put out an APB immediately. Do you have any idea where this lake house might be?" I thought hard, remembering conversations with Abby over the past few months. Abby mentioned a special lake house with the blue door, where she went with Diane while Thomas was at a conference. She said it had ducks she could feed and a tire swing. The officer asked for more details about vehicles and when Diane might have left with Abby. As we were talking, a nurse approached to tell me Thomas was awake and asking for me. My son looked pale but alert when I entered his room. "Mom," he said hoarsely, "they have Abby." "I know," I said, taking his hand. "The police are looking for them now." "Thomas, why didn't you tell me what was going on?" Tears filled his eyes. "I just found out the full extent of it last week. I've been gathering evidence, trying to protect our assets and plan how to confront her without putting Abby at risk." He squeezed my hand. I knew something was wrong for months, but I couldn't believe she would, that anyone could. "I found the articles," I said gently, "about Elizabeth Winters and Patrick Walters." He nodded weakly. "Her real name is Elizabeth. She's been transferring money to offshore accounts for months. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. When I discovered it, she convinced me it was for legitimate investments. I wanted to believe her." His voice broke. "For Abby's sake. Did you know about Patrick?" "I suspected she was seeing someone. I hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago. That's when I learned everything. Their history, the previous cases, all of it. He tried to sit up, wincing. The lake house is registered under the name Walter Prince, an anagram of Patrick Walters. It's about 60 miles north of here, on Carson Lake. I found the property records when I was tracking the money. Just then, a detective entered the room. After confirming Thomas was able to give a statement, he explained that officers were already en route to Carson Lake based on my information. "We need to go there now," Thomas insisted, trying to remove his IV. The detective shook his head. "Sir, you're in no condition to travel. We have officers handling the situation." "You don't understand," Thomas said desperately. "They've done this before. They know how to disappear. And they have my daughter." Despite the medical staff's objections, Thomas checked himself out against medical advice 30 minutes later. The detective agreed to take us to the lake house in his car, recognizing that we might be able to help if Abby was frightened or if Diane and Patrick tried to use her as leverage. As we sped toward Carson Lake, I silently prayed we weren't too late. The property records Thomas had discovered might have been their undoing, the one mistake in their otherwise meticulous scheme. But these were people who had evaded capture across multiple states. Would they be waiting for us? Or would we find nothing but an empty house and more broken promises? The drive to Carson Lake seemed interminable. Thomas sat rigid beside me in the back of the detective's car, his face pale but determined. 2 police cruisers followed behind us, lights flashing but sirens silent as we approached the remote area. "There," Thomas pointed, as we turned onto a narrow road that curved around the lake. About a quarter-mile ahead stood a modest cabin with weathered wood siding, and just as Abby had described, a bright blue door. A silver SUV was parked outside, Diane's vehicle. The detective pulled over before we came into view of the cabin and instructed us to stay in the car while officers assessed the situation. Through the trees, we could see movement on the cabin's deck. A woman pacing back and forth with a cell phone pressed to her ear. "That's her," Thomas whispered, his hands clenched into fists. "But I don't see Abby or Patrick." After what seemed like an eternity, the detective returned. "We have officers positioned around the property. They've visual confirmation of 2 adults and 1 child inside. We're going to approach carefully, to avoid escalating the situation." He looked directly at Thomas. "I understand your concern for your daughter, but I need you to follow our lead completely. Can you do that?" Thomas nodded, though I could feel him trembling with the effort of restraining himself. We followed the detective's car as it slowly approached the cabin, stopping about 50 yards away. Officers took positions behind their vehicles as the detective spoke through a loudspeaker. "Elizabeth Winters and Patrick Walters. This is the police. We have the house surrounded. Come out with your hands visible." For several long moments, nothing happened. Then the blue door opened, and Diane, or Elizabeth, stepped out, her expression a mask of confusion. "Officers, there must be some mistake," she called, her voice carrying across the yard. "My name is Diane Reynolds. This is my family's vacation home." Thomas made a move to exit the car, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait," I whispered. "Let them handle this." The detective continued. "We know who you are, Miss Winters. We also know about the warrants in Florida and Georgia. Send out the child, and then both you and Mr. Walters come out with your hands up." Elizabeth's facade cracked slightly. "My husband will be here shortly. This is all a misunderstanding that he can clear up. My daughter is napping inside." "Your husband is right here," the detective replied, gesturing toward our car. "Thomas Reynolds has provided us with evidence of your true identity and fraudulent activities." At this, Elizabeth's expression darkened. She retreated inside, slamming the door. The police maintained their positions, and the detective requested backup and a negotiator over his radio. "What now?" I asked, my heart racing at the thought of Abby trapped inside with these criminals. "Now we wait," the detective replied. "They're contained, and know they're discovered. The negotiator will establish communication and work to secure the child's safe release." But before the negotiator could arrive, the door opened again. This time, Patrick emerged, holding Abby in front of him like a shield. My breath caught in my throat as I saw my granddaughter's terrified face and the blanket clutched tightly in her small hands. "We're leaving," Patrick announced loudly. "Anyone tries to stop us, there will be consequences." When his hand moved to his waistband, revealing the handle of a gun, the officers tensed, weapons raised but unable to fire with Abby in the way. Thomas lurched forward, and this time I couldn't stop him. He burst from the car, ignoring the detective's shout. "Patrick Walters," Thomas called, his voice steady, despite the fear I knew was consuming him. "Let my daughter go." Patrick's grip on Abby tightened. "Your daughter? That's debatable. The adoption papers say otherwise." "Those papers are forgeries," Thomas replied, taking a cautious step forward as officers frantically gestured for him to get back. "You and I both know that." Elizabeth appeared in the doorway behind Patrick. "Get back in the car, Thomas. This doesn't concern you anymore." "Doesn't concern me?" Thomas's voice rose incredulously. "You've stolen from me, lied to me, drugged me, and now you're kidnapping my child. How exactly does this not concern me?" While this exchange continued, I noticed something that gave me a spark of hope. Abby, though clearly frightened, was working at something within the folds of her blanket. The blanket I had repaired after discovering the flash drives. Had she hidden something new inside it? I slowly exited the car, staying behind the police line, but positioning myself where Abby could see me. When our eyes met, I gave her a small, reassuring nod. She blinked rapidly, tears streaming down her face, but her hands continued their subtle movement within the blanket. Patrick, growing increasingly agitated, began backing toward the SUV with Abby still in his grasp. "Enough talking. Elizabeth, get the bags. We're leaving now." It was then that Elizabeth revealed her true colors. "Leave the girl," she said coldly. "She'll slow us down, and they won't shoot if it's just us." Patrick looked at her in surprise. "The girl is our insurance." "She's a liability," Elizabeth snapped. "We have enough money. We can disappear without her." Abby let out a terrified wail at these words, her small body trembling against Patrick's grip. The betrayal on Patrick's face was evident. Clearly, this abandonment hadn't been part of their plan. In that moment of distraction, I called out, "Abby, honey, remember what we talked about?" "About secrets?" Patrick's attention snapped to me. "Shut up, old woman." But Abby understood. With surprising quickness for a 4-year-old, she pressed something in her blanket. Immediately, a loud, clear recording played. Elizabeth's voice saying, "Once we have the last transfer, we take the girl across the border. Her adoption papers are ready, and with her new identity, Reynolds will never find her. We've done this twice before, and it worked perfectly." Patrick's voice followed on the recording. "What about the old lady? She's suspicious." "Once we're gone, it won't matter what she suspects," Elizabeth's recorded voice replied coldly. The recording continued, detailing their plans and previous crimes in Georgia and Florida. In the moment of shock that followed, Patrick's grip on Abby loosened. Thomas lunged forward, pulling Abby from Patrick's grasp, while simultaneously knocking the gun from his hand. Officers swarmed forward, securing both Patrick and Elizabeth, while Thomas carried a sobbing Abby to safety. I rushed to meet them, enfolding both in a tight embrace as Abby clung to her blanket and her father. "How?" Thomas asked, looking at the blanket in amazement. Through her tears, Abby explained in her 4-year-old way. "Grandma showed me how to hide good secrets in blankie. I put my special microphone inside when Mommy and the bad man were talking. Grandma said sometimes we need proof to keep people safe. I had indeed sewn a small recording device into the blanket during my investigation, a simple voice-activated recorder that I had shown Abby how to use, just in case we ever needed to remember something important. I never imagined my granddaughter would use it so effectively or courageously." As the police led Elizabeth and Patrick away in handcuffs, I heard Elizabeth hiss at me, "You meddling old fool, you've ruined everything." I met her gaze steadily. "No, Elizabeth. You did that all on your own when you threatened my family." Holding Abby close as Thomas spoke with the officers, I felt an overwhelming mixture of relief and gratitude. The blanket that had started this entire ordeal, the blanket made from the shirts of my late husband, had ultimately been the key to saving our family. Frank would have been proud, I thought, of both his son's resilience and his granddaughter's bravery. As we prepared to leave the lake house, Abby looked up at me with red-rimmed but calmer eyes. "Is the bad mommy going away forever?" she asked quietly. "Yes, sweetheart," I assured her, smoothing her tangled curls. "She can't hurt anyone anymore. You're safe now." She nodded solemnly, then held up her blanket. "Blankie kept us safe, just like you said it would, Grandma." Through my tears, I managed to smile. "Yes, Abby. Sometimes the things we love most have a way of protecting us when we need it most." The months following the arrests of Elizabeth Winters and Patrick Walters were challenging for our family. Thomas had to face not only the betrayal by the woman he had married, but also the financial aftermath of her schemes. Fortunately, with the evidence we provided, authorities were able to freeze many of the offshore accounts before the money disappeared completely. Thomas would eventually recover about 70% of what had been stolen. The investigation revealed that Elizabeth and Patrick had indeed done this before, twice targeting wealthy single parents, gaining their trust, accessing their finances, and then disappearing with both money and children. In one case, they had successfully staged a family move and vanished with a 3-year-old boy, whose father had spent years searching for them without success. That child, now 7, was finally reunited with his biological father. For Thomas, the most painful revelation came with the DNA test that confirmed what I had suspected all along. Abby was indeed his biological daughter. The adoption paperwork had been forged as part of Elizabeth's plan to take Abby across the border with a new identity. The sick manipulation of making him believe his own child might not be his had been just another layer of their cruel deception. Abby struggled with nightmares and anxiety in the aftermath. The betrayal by the woman she had called Mommy left deep emotional wounds that wouldn't heal overnight. Thomas arranged for her to see Dr. Jessica Andrews, a child psychologist specializing in trauma. The gentle, patient woman quickly gained Abby's trust, helping her process her experiences through play therapy and art. I sold my house and moved into a small garden cottage just 2 blocks from Thomas and Abby. Being closer allowed me to help with childcare, while Thomas rebuilt his law practice, which had suffered during the ordeal. More importantly, it gave Abby the security of having both her father and grandmother consistently present in her life. Together, the 3 of us attended family therapy sessions with Dr. Andrews, learning how to communicate better and create new traditions that would help heal our fractured sense of family. Slowly, laughter returned to our gatherings. Thomas began to smile again, and Abby's nightmares became less frequent. The blanket remained Abby's constant companion, though its significance had transformed. Rather than a reminder of deception, it became a symbol of how love and quick thinking had saved our family. I carefully removed the recording device and repaired the seam once more, adding a small heart embroidered with blue thread, the same color as Frank's eyes, Thomas's eyes, and Abby's eyes. Our family connection, stitched permanently into fabric that had already witnessed so much. 6 months after the arrests, I was preparing Sunday dinner when Thomas arrived with unexpected news. "Jessica asked if she could join us today," he said, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "Is that okay?" I raised an eyebrow. "Dr. Andrews?" "Of course it's okay, but this is the 3rd Sunday this month she's joined us. Something you want to tell me?" Thomas busied himself setting the table. "We've been spending some time together outside of Abby's sessions. She's special, Mom." The happiness in his voice warmed my heart. "I think that's wonderful, Thomas. She's a lovely woman." Abby skipped into the kitchen, her curls bouncing. "Is Dr. Jessica coming again? She promised to show me how to make friendship bracelets." The ease with which Abby had accepted Jessica's increasing presence in our lives spoke volumes. Unlike with Elizabeth, there was no tension, no walking on eggshells. Jessica's genuine warmth and respect for our family bonds had created space for something new to grow. Over dinner, I watched Thomas and Jessica exchange glances filled with possibility. It was too soon for anything definitive. Wounds were still healing, but the foundation for something real and lasting was being carefully laid. Later that evening, after Jessica had left and Abby was tucked in bed, Thomas joined me on the porch swing. "I've been thinking about moving the practice closer to home," he said, gazing at the stars. "Spending less time commuting and more time with Abby." "I think that's wise," I replied. "Time is precious." He nodded, quiet for a moment, before adding, "I also wanted to thank you, Mom. Not just for what you did with Elizabeth and Patrick, but for everything since. For believing in me even when I didn't believe in you. For loving Abby so fiercely." I squeezed his hand. "That's what family does. Real family." 1 year later, on a perfect autumn day, we gathered in my garden for a celebration. Thomas and Jessica, who had grown closer through their shared commitment to Abby's well-being, announced their engagement. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but something built on friendship, mutual respect, and genuine care. Everything Thomas's first marriage had lacked. As family and friends congratulated the happy couple, I found Abby sitting on the garden bench, her fingers tracing the patchwork squares of her now smaller-seeming blanket. "Are you okay with Daddy marrying Dr. Jessica?" I asked, sitting beside her. Abby nodded thoughtfully. "She makes him smile, the real smile, not the pretend one. And she doesn't mind when I still need my blanket sometimes." "She's a wise woman," I agreed. Abby looked up at me with earnest eyes. "Grandma, can you teach me to sew? I want to make blankets too, ones that keep people safe." My heart swelled with love for this resilient little girl. "I would be honored to teach you, sweetheart." In the months that followed, Abby and I spent many afternoons at my sewing table. She proved to be a quick learner, her small fingers becoming increasingly nimble with practice. Together we created a special wedding quilt for Thomas and Jessica, incorporating squares that represented our family journey, both the painful parts and the healing. On the day Thomas and Jessica exchanged vows in our backyard, Abby presented them with our creation. "It has secret pockets," she explained seriously, "but only for good secrets, like love notes and happy memories." Jessica knelt down to Abby's level, tears in her eyes. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received," she said, embracing the child who would soon officially become her daughter, though in heart they had already formed an unbreakable bond. Standing there, watching my son begin a new chapter with a woman worthy of his trust, seeing my granddaughter bloom again after the storm that had nearly uprooted her young life, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. It had begun with a discarded blanket and a mother's intuition, the nagging sense that something wasn't right. By trusting that instinct, by refusing to look away from uncomfortable truths, I had helped save my family from predators who had counted on silence and disbelief to achieve their goals. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around us, Abby and I sat together in the garden, working on a new small blanket for her doll. "You know what I learned, Grandma?" she said, carefully pushing her needle through the fabric. "What's that, sweetheart?" "Sometimes the things we make to protect others end up protecting us instead." Her eyes, so like her father's and grandfather's, met mine with wisdom beyond her years, like my blanket. "You made it to keep me warm, but it ended up saving all of us." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle deep in my soul. "That's right, Abby. And do you know what else? Sometimes the threads that connect us to the people we love are stronger than any force trying to break them." She nodded solemnly, returning to her stitching with renewed purpose. As the sun set on that perfect day, casting golden light across our gathered loved ones, I said a silent thank you to Frank, wherever his spirit might be. "Thank you for showing me that love doesn't end with loss. It transforms, becoming a different kind of presence in our lives." The blanket I had created from his shirts had been my way of weaving his love into Abby's life. Little did I know that act would one day be the thread that unraveled a dangerous deception and saved our family. In the end, what had made my blood run cold upon discovering the flash drives had led to a warmth and security I feared we might never reclaim. The journey reminded me that sometimes the most precious things we protect end up protecting us in return, and the threads of family, real family, cannot be permanently broken by deception. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something wasn't right, only to discover your instincts were trying to protect you or someone you love? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to hear more family stories, and share it with someone who might need a reminder to trust their intuition when it comes to protecting those they love. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the courage to uncover the truth, no matter how difficult the journey.